Cheers, y'all. How's it going? I have just finished my final run before we fly out for the Berlin Marathon. And the question on everyone's mind, aka burning in my mind, is am I ready for this race? I think the answer is yes, but I'll get into more of that later. But very, very excited. By the time you're watching this, I will be on the ground, not yet in Berlin, but spending some time in Prague. So very excited for the trip. In the process of packing up all of my things, if it makes you anxious that I am not yet packed and not yet organized, you are not alone. I have a lot to do to go through all the lists and everything before the flight tonight, plus before work starts this morning. But feeling good about the race, feeling excited. I've got a plan, I've got a strategy. We'll talk more about that, but just so pumped for this race. All right, so let's talk through everything, although we will have to do it somewhat quickly because, as I mentioned, I have a ton of work to do before our flight takes off at 7:30 this evening. But we'll break this video down into 3 parts. First, I'll just go over sort of our trip itinerary, what you can expect, what we'll be doing. Second, I'll answer that question for you. Am I ready for the race? What are some of my hesitations, concerns, and what I have going for me? And last but not least, a little bit of race strategy as well. So kicking things off, itinerary. And just a quick note, if you want to follow along on the trip, I am hoping to keep y'all updated on YouTube with some short form videos of the weekend, but I would encourage you, follow me on Instagram. That is definitely where I will be most active in terms of live updates of what we're doing, what activities we're participating in, and all of the race goodness. So definitely follow on Instagram if you don't already, but like I said, I will try to update YouTube as often as possible as well. In terms of the itinerary, we are flying out tonight to Prague in the Czech Republic. I'm pretty excited. So my wife and I have not done a solo overseas international trip ever. This will be the first one. So decided to make a trip out of it. So we are not just going to Germany, to Berlin for the marathon. We're going to fly into Prague. We'll land there Thursday morning, spend all day Thursday, the first half of the day on Friday in Prague. Then we're taking the train to Berlin Friday. We'll get there Friday evening. We will be staying in Berlin for the rest of the trip. So from Friday until next Wednesday, the 27th. Race is going to be on Sunday, so we'll have Friday. Saturday, very relaxing day, low key. We'll do the expo. We'll try to fit in that pasta dinner. There is an organized shakeout run sponsored by the race. I'm hoping I might be able to take advantage of that as well on Saturday. Sunday will be the marathon, so that's pretty much all we're going to do that day, apart from the post-race celebrations and festivities. I've heard there are quite a few of them going on around Berlin after the race, so excited to take advantage of those as well. Monday, recovery/explore Berlin day. So we've never been to Berlin before. We've been to southern Germany quite a few times, but am excited to see the city. I've heard such phenomenal things, and the number of people I've talked to who travel a lot and say Berlin is one of, if not their favorite cities they visited. I'm just so excited to go and see the sights. So excited to travel. We'll spend most of the day Monday traveling around and seeing as much as we can in Berlin. And then on Tuesday, we'll be taking a day trip into Poland. So could not be more excited for the race. And that's the end of part 1. So I guess that's a good transition into part 2. Along with the excitement of the race, the pre-race excitement, comes the pre-race jitters. Am I ready for this race? And the reason for the hesitation, the uneasiness, is just because I have not trained as much for this race as I would have liked, and I think I am the least prepared for this marathon as I've been for any marathon that I've trained for in the past. I had mentioned a few videos ago, had a little bit of a knee injury that set me back quite a bit, and I've kind of been crawling my way back in the long runs since then. But my primary goal has been to make sure that I get to today, that I get to the race healthy, with my body feeling good, with no lingering injuries or anything like that, in which I have been very successful. But what that meant was a pretty slow increase in weekly mileage and long run mileage, which means I only got up to 15 miles for my long run before this race. If we rewind to when I was filming the video going over my training plan at the very beginning, I had mentioned I hope to at least get to like 20 or 22 miles, but unfortunately that just wasn't in the cards with everything that happened. I have never not run at least 20 miles before a marathon attempt, so that's where the sense of uneasiness comes from. I just haven't done this distance in so long. My last marathon was last April 2022, so well over a year ago at this point. And that race went very well, but again, I was the best trained for that marathon. And since then, I haven't done any kind of speed work. I haven't done any significant long distance road running. It has just been long, slow miles preparing for the 100 miler that I did earlier this year, and now transitioning back into road running towards the second half of the year. So that's where the nerves come in. Just haven't done a marathon in a while. I remember enough about that feeling of miles like 20 to 24 or 22 to 25, whether you hit the notorious wall where the legs start to fall apart. And so that's where the nerves come in. Is all of my long runs have gone very well. I've felt really good during these workouts, but knowing that the race doesn't start until mile 20, and that's when the wheels can start to come off. And how am I going to respond in the moment? How am I going to respond when things are going poorly, when I start to get sore, when and if I hit that wall? How am I going to respond? How am I going to push through? And so that's where the nerves come in. But what I have going for me, on the other hand, what gives me confidence, 15 miles was the longest long run I did before running my 100 miler. So if I can do 15 miles to 100 miles, hopefully I can do 15 miles to 26.2. Obviously, those are very, very different races. A ton of people have said, when I've talked about kind of some of my nervousness going into this race, so many people have said, well, you did a 100 miler, like a marathon's easy. But I just cannot overstate how different the racing is, how different the running is between an ultra marathon and a marathon, particularly a 100 miler. A lot of, especially the second half of that 100 miler, was walking or just power hiking. And so understanding that the pounding of the pavement during a road marathon takes a much more significant toll on the body. Even though it's significantly fewer miles, takes a lot more of a toll a lot sooner into the race, just because of the stressful nature of the race. You're running a lot faster on a much harder surface, and so things can start to break down a little bit more quickly. But what I am really hoping for, again, getting back to the things that I have going for me during that 100 miler, hopefully some things that I can fall back on. We ran, I think, the first 30-ish miles around a 12-minute mile pace, and that's taking into account the fact that we're running on trails, we're starting in the dirt, somewhat difficult terrain, and so we were moving really, really good. So the fact that I only ran 15 miles before completing that 100, but also the first 30-ish miles of that race were so strong, that's some of the experience I'm hoping to fall back on going into Berlin. The other piece I think I have going for me is this will be my 5th marathon, if I'm not mistaken. And so the experience certainly helps a lot. I mentioned the nervousness. A lot of it comes from not knowing what to expect in that final 10K of the race. But the nice thing is I've been there before. I've had a few different experiences in that zone. And so just being able to remind myself, like, hey, we've been there. We've had that pain. We've had much different experiences during that last 10K in each of the 4 races that I've done in the past. And so just remembering, like, even when it was bad, if you got to run, walk, whatever you have to do, you can adapt in the moment. And so just being able to kind of run through historical performances in my head to remind myself what I did in different moments along the way, to hopefully just remind myself what I can do when I'm confronted with any issues that might arise during Berlin. So that's what I have going for me. I think overall, to answer the question, I do think I'm ready. I think it's a 2-part answer in that I'm not as ready as I would have liked to have been, but most importantly, I just can't believe I'm going to Germany to run the Berlin Marathon this weekend, and just reminding myself of that fact over and over again. I'm so excited for this race. It's something, it's an experience that so many folks will never get to experience. So the fact that I was lucky enough to draw a lottery spot and have the privilege to participate in this year's race, my number one goal is just to enjoy the experience. So I think I am certainly well enough prepared to accomplish that goal, and just cannot wait to line up on the starting line on Sunday morning. And that's a good transition point into the third and final point, briefly discussing race strategy. And I say briefly because there's nothing too technical here. I got my start time for the race. I'm starting around 9:15 in the morning, which is perfect. I feel like that's a beautiful time to start a marathon. You don't have to wake up super early. You get to sleep in a little bit, but you're also hopefully not running super late into the day. So really, really excited about that start time. The weather looks perfect. We're looking at a low of like 50 degrees, a high in the mid 60s. So that'll be ideal depending on how sunny it is. I think it could get a little bit warm towards the tail end, but nothing compared to what I've been training through this summer. So very, very excited at the weather outlook right now. I guess that's a good time to knock on wood and make sure things hold up going into the race. But in terms of strategy, I mentioned nothing too crazy. I'm kind of going to take it, I think probably like 10K by 10K. I may break it down into like 5K segments just in terms of checking in on pace and maybe making some minor adjustments, but overall goals is just going to be breaking it into 10K. So the first 10K, gonna do my best to just hold like a 9-minute mile pace. Find that comfortable pace, settle into that, and just try to hold steady. Nice thing about the Berlin Marathon is the terrain is very consistent, very flat, not a lot of elevation. So don't have to do a ton of planning in terms of like saving for any hills or anything like that. But probably gonna hold like right around a 9-minute mile, hopefully maybe just over, but ideally shooting for 9 minutes flat for that first 10K. Moving into the second 10K, not gonna make too much of an adjustment, maybe just shave 3 to 5 seconds off of my pace, try to get just under a 9-minute mile. And after that first 20K, it's where I wanna check in. How am I feeling? How much gas do I think I have in the tank? And what adjustments do I want to make for the second half? My overall goal for this marathon is just to finish under 4 hours, which I think is definitely doable. Might make some adjustments along the way, again, just based on how I'm feeling, but going into this with a very reserved plan. Again, not wanting to push myself too hard in the start and end up blowing up and hitting that wall too early in the race. That's why I'm taking it hopefully very easily for those first 20K. After that, maybe again shaving off probably not more than 5 seconds. If I'm feeling, depending on how I'm feeling, I might even just hold steady with whatever pace I had for that second 10K, looking at like maybe 8:55, 8:50, holding steady there. And then for that fourth 10K, I think that's where it's really, okay, how are we feeling? Do we think we have energy to continue to push? Do we think we can still accelerate? And this is where I might split it into kind of smaller 5K segments. Maybe take another 5 seconds off for that next 5K, take another 5 seconds off the pace. I do like to run my races with a negative split, but for anyone who's run a marathon knows that plan can very quickly go out the window depending on how you're feeling towards the end of that race. But really just looking to improve or increase my pace, decrease my pace by 5 seconds every 10-ish kilometers, and then breaking that down into 5-kilometer segments towards the end of the race, if that makes sense. It does in my head, so hopefully that makes sense to you all as well. I'm doing kilometers instead of miles just because I'm assuming those will be the more prevalent mile markers or distance markers on the course in Berlin. All of the water stations are at kilometer markers. I got to switch my watch over to kilometers to make sure I don't have to do that mental conversion or anything along the way. But yes, overall, that's the plan. Start conservative, continue conservative, make conservative pace increases throughout, and hopefully finish maybe even with some gas in the tank, feeling not completely and utterly destroyed, and with enough energy to truly take in that finish line experience. That's what I've just been running through my head through the last couple of weeks of trainings during any difficult long runs, especially in the summer heat with the humidity when I'm struggling in those last few miles. Just picturing the gates at the finish line for the Berlin Marathon, the crowd cheering as you run through, and just cannot wait for this race. So thank you all for joining the process so far, for tuning in for this ride, for the ups and the downs. If you've been here through several races, you've followed quite a journey that we've been on, and this is just another step on that journey, hoping to continue to improve at this distance that seems to be so elusive to me. So very excited for another attempt at the marathon and cannot believe it is going to be the Berlin Marathon. If you'd like to follow along again this weekend, please do be sure to follow me on Instagram. It's just at IRunOnBeer, and hopefully I'll be posting some short videos on YouTube as well to keep you updated throughout the weekend. You can track me, download the Berlin Marathon app. You can do runner tracking on there. that'll be 9:15 Sunday morning, which is 3:15 Eastern in the U.S., hopefully finishing right around like 7 or 7:15 in the morning in the U.S. So pretty early for y'all, but just cannot wait for the experience. So I'm going to hop off because I still have a lot to do, got to finish packing, and I will see you somewhere along the way. Cheers, y'all.